Mr. Murthy is on the boards of DBS Bank, Singapore's largest government-owned bank, the Asia Pacific Advisory Board of British Telecommunications, and several other institutions. I'll begin by asking Professor Saffo the first question. A lot of expectations and hopes were riding or have been riding on technology. And technology was expected to make the world a more equitable place. But this doesn't seem to have quite happened or has happened very slowly. Indeed, it's quite conceivable that if you're not a knowledge worker today, you may become the new poor. Has something gone wrong?
This is how it always happens. We're optimists as human beings. Perhaps there are times when we shouldn't be. Revolutions are rarely fair things, but you can think of every major advance of technology in the last century, and inevitably everyone said it would cure cancer, bring in world peace. We had the birth of the environmental movement because of that picture from space of the whole world in one picture. And everyone thought this would change attitudes. Well, it didn't. That's why the conservatives in the United States still don't believe that global warming is real. So this is normal. We pin our hopes, our fondest hopes, in the new technologies to come along, and sometimes we also think they're the source of our deepest fears. And inevitably what happens is technology is neither savior nor destroyer. We muddle through somewhere in the middle and don't lose our optimism.
Mr. Murthy?
I personally believe nothing has gone wrong. After all, the purpose of technology is to reduce cost, to improve productivity, to reduce cycle time, improve comfort level, and hopefully improve entertainment value, etc., etc. When I think of my mother spending 10 hours a day from morning to night using wood to produce breakfast, lunch, dinner, etc., etc. Today I find that her life has become so much better because she uses gas. Similarly, when I think of my father using diabetes tablets, probably at that point in time something like ₹1 or so, today I use them at a fraction of that price. Similarly, the price of cancer treatment has gone down. HIV/AIDS has gone down. There is the remote medical facility that is available thanks to internet. Today almost everybody, every family has a TV, everybody has a radio. Many people have access to internet. You've got ATMs. You've brought the power of banking to the poorest of the poor thanks to ATM. In other words, I do think that technology has indeed made the lives of the poor better. There are perhaps some not so desirable aspects, but that will always be there with every instrument. You can use an instrument for peace, you can use an instrument for war. So as long as the majority of the people use this instrument for peace, for harmony, for betterment, I'm quite happy with it.
But do you think that the knowledge worker has edge in a rapidly in an era where technology is going to make more and more difference at work, rather than the non-knowledge worker, especially in a country like India?
Well, I think in every society, at any given point of time, certain professions will attract premium. There is no doubt at all. It's the simple law of demand and supply. As long as the demand is higher than the supply and the supply is limited, the prices are bound to go up. That's all what you see today in terms of the knowledge workers, particularly in a country like India. The disposable income is high, they get much better salaries, etc. So the solution is for us to ensure that we have larger supply so that we can garner bigger markets, we can create more opportunities for a larger number of young men and women. That's the way I look at it.
Professor Saffo, we are seeing the emergence of nomadic mobile workforce that can move across the globe wherever there are opportunities. But in markets like India, where there are sharp inequalities, there is some fear that such a mobile workforce could undermine employment opportunities for the not so privileged. How can nations like India stand up to these challenges?
Well, you know, I actually think the place where we're going to see some surprises in this regard is the United States. That India is used to diaspora and reverse diaspora. The United States is not. And we're just starting to see the first trickle of Americans abroad. And of course, here in India, you're seeing American college students coming out to work in outsourced firms. It's kind of the adventurous thing to do for a little while after college and the like. I think that's an indicator. And we are seeing knowledge workers leave the United States. So the biggest shock of the left behinds may actually be in places like the United States. What do you do about it? You can't fight it. And I think this is going to be one of the great social challenges for governments. And by the way, I disagree with Frank about the nation state, that I think we're headed into a century where the center of gravity is moving away from the nation state towards city-states, and that the central economic actors, whether de facto or actually de jure, are going to be city-states. And it's exactly around these sorts of issues that nation-states are either going to figure out how to solve this, or they are going to become fairly irrelevant.
Mr. Murthy, the reverse diaspora into markets like India, where you see a larger number and people in larger numbers moving to markets like India, does that undermine employment opportunities for people here, at least in some sections? Your company employs a fair amount of expatriates, and that proportion is growing. What impact does that have?
Well, the number of expats coming and taking up jobs in India is a very, very small percentage. I don't think that is significant when you compare with the number of jobs that professionals from countries like India, China, Brazil, etc., are taking away from countries like US, UK, etc., for a very good reason. That is, they have competencies, they have global competencies, they provide better value for money, all of that. So the issue is not so much the Americans, the British, the Germans coming and taking away jobs from Indians. The issue is we are not in a position to create opportunities for a much larger number of Indians. Why? Because I personally believe this is a deliberate policy. This is the vested interest of the elite in India. How do we do that? By limiting access to English medium schools from the primary and middle school stage. We are automatically creating a big divide between the haves, that is, people who have great opportunities, and those that do not have. I think that is the crucial question that we have to debate. Is this the right human resources development policy that the country should have? Should we not allow every parent to decide what kind of school they want to send their children to? Should we not provide the facility of a global language like English to the children of the rural poor? Should we not allow access to English medium schools to the gardeners in emphasis, to the attenders, to the clerks, etc.? I think that's the way to to bridge this divide rather than limiting access to global opportunities to the children of corporate leaders, politicians, bureaucrats, etc., etc.
I just want to second that. I think Murthy is right. 60 years ago, the historians Will and Ariel Durant put it very nicely when they said, civilization is a race between education and catastrophe. And that's the race we're in. This is a global brain race, and the nations that educate their populace and give them the greatest educational opportunities are going to be the ones in the best position.
Technology accelerates and helps in spreading globalization. There's no doubt about it. It distributes wealth, and globalization distributes wealth across nations and transfers economic benefits swiftly. But technology can also mean that risks and crises spread faster across the world. How do you see, as a futurist, how do you see the world meeting the challenges of combating such risks which accelerate because of better technology?
Well, I think we're in for some real surprises. We have a global economy, but we don't have a global central bank. We don't have a real global currency. We've had lots of examples of the surprises that come from a volatility that crosses borders. I think the short answer is we're going to see more global contagions, and not all of them are going to be pleasant.
I often say at Emphasis the following adage: ships are safest in the harbor, but they are not meant to be there. They have to go into the high seas, face the storm, and reach the comfort of a safe, desirable destination. That, in other words, risk is given. No matter in what orbit you are operating, there will always be risk. The smartness is to foresee these risks and take appropriate risk mitigation measures. Now, in the case of a nation, in the case of building global competencies for a nation, what is it that we can do? The only thing we can do is to advance our preparedness to handle change. That is, embrace problem solving, embrace innovative mindset, create a curriculum that will help our young men and women to handle this change with minimal discomfort. That is where once again I come back to this whole issue of human resources development. All of us have been talking about infrastructure in this company, the airports, the roads and all of that, but somehow, after Nehru, I'm making a very strong statement, frankly, after Nehru, other governments have not paid similar interest to building up the human resources competencies of this country. Look at the kinds of things that Nehru did. IITs, IIMs, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, regional engineering colleges. You name it, he did all of that. But after that, in the next, 43 years or so, the incremental improvement we have done is minimal. So I think as long as India realizes that the only insurance we have to handle future risks coming out of technological advances, coming out of globalization, coming out of comparative advantage balances being disturbed, that is possible only by focusing on education, innovation, human resources development.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. But this global economy is exciting, and it presents opportunities because it is above all uncertain. And we don't often explicitly think about it, but there's a fundamental difference between risk and uncertainty. Risk is something that's reached a point we can quantify it. Uncertainty is something that can't be quantified and sometimes drives us crazy, but uncertainty is, in my opinion, the most valuable and best thing about globalization, because uncertainty is opportunity. The problem is we get deeper into globalization. Well, think about India. I think a big part of why you were able to be so successful with your vision of getting into the IT business and running around the protection of sentiments in this country was there was nothing to lose. There really was no downside because there wasn't anything there. And you were, as a nation, able to take full advantage of the uncertainty. As you get successful, what happens is suddenly you have things to lose. The risk rises more quickly than the uncertainty. And I think that's what's paralyzed a lot of U.S. industries, is an obsession about worrying about the things they could lose rather than taking advantage of the uncertainty. And it's not in human nature to love uncertainty, but I think we have to learn to love it.
What are the downsides, really? Because if you look at the growing economic gap between those who benefit from globalization and technology and those who don't, it's turning sometimes into a civil problem. In Bangalore, we've seen IT companies become soft targets during any social unrest, simply because they're considered the new symbol of, globalization. How do you see this kind of conflict panning out in future? I mean,
there are several reasons for the civil unrest that we see, for the kind of attitude that the IT professionals face from the rest of the population in cities. One of them is the fact that the voting strength in India is by and large in rural India. However, the economic energy in the country is in urban India, or in some cases semi-urban India, if you look at steel plants and things like that. Now, given the fact that most of the elite lives in urban India, the infrastructure, though it's not very good by world standards, in urban India is better than rural India. With the result, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, positive feedback we have generated, more and more investments come into urban India. With the result, we are widening the chasm between urban India and rural India. And if you took the snapshot at a given point of time, politicians are in a big dilemma. On the one hand, there is so much of discussion, so much of haranguing about increasing the urban infrastructure, about providing facilities for the IT professionals to go from home to office, for the English mediums schooling of their children, pollution control, etc., etc. On the other hand, rural Indians are in a much worse position. So that's one. With the result, anybody who is seen to support urban India, anybody who is seen to support these IT professionals, may not be liked by the rural Indians, and he or she may lose elections. That's one. The second thing is, because we have had a restrictive policy vis-a-vis opportunities to high-quality jobs, as I talked about, thanks to our focus on relegating English medium schools to the second or the third place and limiting that opportunity to only a small people. This small group will always be the target of the vast majority who have been very rightfully denied. Who have been denied, and they are very rightful in being unhappy with us. So the solution is, one, we have to create more and more infrastructure so that we can bring employment to rural India by focusing on low-tech manufacturing. Second, we have to provide similar educational opportunities whether it is an urban child or a rural child. I would say if our politicians took these two major policy decisions, I believe that we will be, sometime in the future, not immediately, we will be able to reduce the gap between the urban and rural India, and all these problems hopefully will go away.
Let's look away from India for a moment. Professor Saffo, the continuing rise of Asia, and particularly China and India doing according to the script, has been largely going as predicted. But what of Africa, where except for small pockets, that may be the exception, development and growth has been slow? What kind of future do you see for the African economies, especially in the context of technology and advancement?
Well, I thought it was interesting how this issue has come up several times today. And I think it's the international equivalent of the haves and have-nots, that globalization is not going to be sustainable unless all of the populations on the planet are engaged in some meaningful way. The one safe bet is the United States isn't going to be a player in Africa. American executives don't like to go to Africa. They don't understand the size of the markets. Like, India has a long tradition of being engaged in Africa. China also actually has a long tradition. We forget that the great naval expeditions of Zheng He, those expeditions made it all the way to the African coast. And I don't need to tell anyone in this room, it's hardly news to you, that China is deeply engaged in Africa and competing to absorb resources and the like. Which, by the way, makes me, as an American, feel very good, because there are actually some places on this planet where the Americans are not the most hated people, and it's a relief, because it seems like I spend my whole time going abroad saying, I'm sorry, you know, I'm sorry, I'm embarrassed. I think that, well, to put a very specific point on it, the path China's taking in Africa is not one that I would be particularly proud of if I were Chinese. Moving in, exploiting resources, maybe they'll be better colonialists than the last ones. I think India has a very specific role to play here. Your mercantile tradition could be a counterbalance to that. It could greatly encourage African development and participation in the global economy. And I really hope to see that happen.
I believe that economic growth, prosperity, betterment of a society, at least in the material form, will all come because of a few reasons. One, entrepreneurship. Ability to take an idea and convert it into jobs, convert it into wealth. That's one, through products, services, all of that. Second, leadership that creates an environment where there is least friction to such entrepreneurs to create more and more jobs, to create more and more wealth, to create better prosperity. China has done a wonderful job in both the areas, that is, in entrepreneurship and also in leadership. In India, certainly I think the entrepreneurship of Indians has been known for ages. And Indian entrepreneurs have by and large succeeded in spite of our bureaucracy, in spite of the friction we have to business in India. In Africa, I believe the challenge that the whole world has is to help Africans develop both entrepreneurship as well as an environment where there is least friction to entrepreneurship. In other words, provide leadership or develop leadership. And the day that happens, I can tell you that you don't need to give aid to Africa. Africans are as smart as anybody else. They are as hard. They're as aspirational as anybody else. But the important thing is somehow we have to kindle the spirit of entrepreneurship and leadership, an environment where entrepreneurship succeeds easily. That's what I would say.
Professor Saffo, technology, specifically, say, internet technology, has begun to work in different ways on the social fabric today. Some of these are very unexpected. For instance, while internet has brought people closer to each other, it's also increased the distance in terms of social interaction. I mean, a husband spending more time on the internet than with his wife or children, kids being lured into online pornography, people being egged on to kill themselves online. Is technology in some sense sharpening these groups within societies, and how will this affect our world?
Yeah, I was just thinking, it's always the wrong people who want to kill themselves. I'm just kidding. This is a media revolution. This isn't an information revolution. And we've been through media revolutions before, and we follow similar patterns. New media, one sure sign that a new media technology is going to take off is it terrifies parents. And we forget, 100 years ago, parents in the United States were upset that their kids were staying inside and reading books. Today, if a child in the United States picked up a book, the parent would fall over in a dead faint. By the way, I can guarantee you within 10 years, those of you who still have young children then will be saying to them, you can't go outside and play until you finish your video game. It most assuredly will happen. New media always drives us crazy. I was thinking this the other day that it was just a few years ago that it was the 500th anniversary of publication of, or 400th anniversary of publication of Don Quixote de la Mancha by Cervantes. And if you all remember that story, this modest hidalgo wakes up and thinks he is a knight-errant, Don Quixote. And you remember the reason why? Is because he read too many books. So I would just say we should keep this in perspective. I think the number of people actually committing suicide because of the internet is not terribly large. Pornography is a problem, but it's always been a problem, and it's an essential part of every new media. The first special effect invented by the movie industry after 1905 was the keyhole-shaped mask for showing, peering through a keyhole in movies. So, put it this way, when a new media arrives, it always goes through an awkward adolescence. You remember being in adolescence and hormones surging and acne and feeling awkward around girls or boys? We all survived. So, it'll pass.